Welcome back. Thank you very much for connecting with us for ESI number 3. This is the third episode of our webinar series about entrepreneurship, startups, innovation, and to discuss how these will contribute to shape the economic recovery across the ASEAN +6. I'm Giulia Aimone-Marsan, Area Director for Strategy and Partnership, and I'm here together with TJ Ooi, founder of Curated Connectors, a Singapore-based startup, and Lina Maulidina, also from ERIA, to co-host this webinar series. I was mentioning before, this is episode number 3. We had our introductory webinar at the beginning to frame and set the scene of the entire series. Then in episode 2, we discussed about skills for entrepreneurship and innovation. And by the way, if you missed them, the video recordings of our previous episodes are on our ERIA YouTube channel. But today, with episode 3, we want to talk about technology. I'm sure that most of you have already read somewhere about the spectacular acceleration of the digital economy across ASEAN and actually also everywhere else in the world because of the pandemic. And now we want to zoom in and discuss some of the features of what's happening with a great group of speakers. So we will discuss about how digital technologies are enabling entrepreneurship and innovation, including with some examples from the medical tech sphere with our entrepreneurs on the panel. We'll hear different stories from ASEAN countries, but we will also talk about some of the concerns, some of the risks that are associated to digital technologies, such as, for instance, issues like privacy, but also potential biases and discriminations connected with the new emerging technologies. So we're going to have a multifaceted and complex discussion, which is why I think we are going to have an interesting session today. Now, I want to thank once again our speakers for being with us, and TJ will introduce them one by one in a minute. And now I would like to remind all participants to please keep your microphone on mute for the entire duration of the webinar, but please feel free to interact with us through the chat box, especially to ask questions to our speakers, because we will use your questions for the Q&A part of the webinar towards the end. But now it's really time to start the real conversation. So we'll immediately give the floor to TJ. Over to you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Julia, and a good day to all our participants. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just going to jump straight in. I'm going to introduce our speakers. We've got quite an exciting lineup today. Let me first introduce you to Ms. Cortilia Lin. She is the co-founder and head of strategy and marketing for Kyalio, Singapore. So she co-founded this company and set up operations in Singapore, Taiwan, and the Netherlands. Kyalio specializes in mixed reality and artificial intelligence for medical education. Prior to her current role, Cortilia led the new product development for the Economist Intelligence Unit to integrate data science with market intelligence as a service. She also worked in Philips International BV to create customer-centric solutions and design programs. Her work was featured in the Harvard Business Review and also on this particular topic of revolutionizing customer experience with data science. With 13 years of healthcare experience in the US, Europe, and Asia Pacific, she has brought her views on entrepreneurship as well as corporate entrepreneurship across many countries from both a multinational perspective as well as that of a startup. Cortilia specializes in applying data science for new product design, healthcare, portfolio management, sales and marketing, and really what's important for businesses is translating all these insights into top line gain. So do join me in welcoming Cortilia. Thank you for joining us. Next on, let me introduce our speaker from Laos. He is Mr. Souliyo Vongdala, Chief Executive Company Chief Executive Officer, for LOCA company, as well as the Vice President for the Lao ICT Commerce Association. As the CEO for LOCA, it's a tech startup which he founded in 2018, a ride-hailing service application. LOCA envisions to be a platform of convenience for a variety of traveling and commerce by providing high-quality services to its users. And as Vice President of the Lao ICT Commerce Association, he also, he shares his entrepreneurial journey and provides insight and inputs to really looking at the growth and development of ICT in Laos. As a recognition, for entrepreneurs, it's the journey, it's also what they have achieved that is important as they go through their entrepreneurial journey. He was named as a startup and innovation-driven entrepreneur in the ASEAN Business Awards in 2019, and also won the Founder of the Year at the country level for the Rice Bowl Awards in 2017. So welcome, Souliyo. Thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Ms. Xelia Tong, who is Managing Partner for Investor Relations and Partnerships in ScaleUp Malaysia. Xelia, for ScaleUp Malaysia, it is an accelerator for Malaysian companies and startups poised for growth and regional expansion. Through the organization and its experienced team of entrepreneurs, professionals, and investors, they have founded 9 companies, exited 7 companies, and coached more than 1,000 startups and scale-ups. Xelia has always been known for her role in helping develop funding for the startup ecosystem through her work from MDV to Cradle, where she headed investments and the angel tax initiatives. At ScaleUp Malaysia, she works with our companies to help connect them to the right investors. A live wire by nature, Xelia's cheerful disposition and charm is the kind of support you need, especially during such challenging times. So thank you, Xelia, for joining us. It's great to have you.
Thanks, DJ, for your nice intro.
And next we have Kohei Kurihara. Kohei-san is the co-founder and CEO of Privacy by Design Lab, a not-for-profit organization that collaborates with multiple stakeholders, government, corporates, individuals, to provide practical research, education, networking, and more importantly, the building and implementation of sound data governance structures and policies. Prior to this, he was involved in blockchain and identity technology and was president of the Tokyo chapter of the Government Blockchain Association. Kohei-san has worked with a major Japanese e-commerce company and has extensive experience with education and non-profit organizations. So welcome from Japan, Kohei-san. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah, great to be honored. Happy to join us today. Thank you.
Our last speaker, she is currently, I think, not here at the moment. She will be joining us very shortly.
I'm here. I'm here.
Is Amy here already?
I'm here. Hi.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for joining us. Glad you could make it on time. Yeah. Let me quickly introduce you and then let's start this conversation for the afternoon. Amy is the co-founder and director of digital innovation and growth at Time Solutions. It's an award-winning tech consultancy specializing in bridging gaps in organizations. Amy also co-founded the Southeast Asian Women organization and is a consultant with Fund Boards Council UK and Women's Fund Asia. She's an active advocate of gender equality as well as cultural and natural heritage conservation. As co-chair of the US ASEAN Women's Leadership Alumni Network, she also is involved in the Obama Foundation Leader and Climate Reality Leader. As you can see, Amy is a very busy person involved in many facets, as an entrepreneur and also in, I think, really giving back to the society, to really the environment and the ecosystem at large. So she regularly speaks on women's issues in Brunei and mentors female entrepreneurs through local and international mentoring programs. So thank you for joining us. And really, thank you to all our 5 speakers once again. Let me jump straight into why all of you are here this afternoon. And that is to hear our speakers share their thoughts and their views on this whole topic on deep technology and what it holds for the future. So I'd like to start off the first question to Cortilia. Cortilia, please share with us a little bit about your business and how AI has been integrated into your business model, as well as how do you envision it changing medical education. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks, TJ. And thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me this afternoon. Our business is actually integrating virtual reality, aka mixed reality, and artificial intelligence, as TJ already mentioned, into assisting the delivery and access of medical education. I think Julia mentioned the story, right? Why did we decide to embark on this particular journey is when I was working out in my previous role, I was flying quite often across different countries, looking at how physician, how surgeon, how medical professional at the front line are being trained in Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, China, Europe, aka just quite a number of the places. And I realized that a lot of time, a lot of people do have the ambition, and medical service is a very essential, integral part of us to preserve our quality of life, no matter at the early stage of our life stage or later part. Right? Then I realized that there's a lot more technology can bring to the table to assist the access. And I think we are now all based in Southeast Asia. For us, access is definitely something we see day in, day out, how technology, particularly deep tech, help to assist to widespread and the wider reach for the entire population. So when we decided to embark on this particular technology to transform the entire education, that was back in 2019, before COVID time. So the idea is really, if we look at fintech, if we borrow the lesson and example from Grab, from even other technology company out there, what they really do remarkably is to allow the access from unbanked population or people who may not have access to a very convenient, right, or very easy access to cash, right? That's the idea. So when we are doing this particular virtual reality mixed with artificial intelligence, our vision first is really to enable this access. Second, when we look at the artificial intelligence, what can this really do? We talk a bit about it. Personally, I don't view virtual reality or artificial intelligence being an industry. All of this technology need to assist a particular use case or generate value in particular sector. So when I look at education as a whole prior to COVID, we already see that a lot of learning pathway, a lot of learning effectiveness, how exactly we learn, how do we ensure in different contexts, you may be sitting in the remote area of Cambodia, or you are actually in the big city like Manila, exactly what is the learning to us and what is the effectiveness and ultimately the assessment that will enhance our competency and subsequently we can all outshine ourselves in the global stage. That's the challenge we really want to use the artificial intelligence to tackle. So with the pandemic evolves, still every day, sadly, we see it's on the news every day that this country particular probably have access issue again to education, not just because of the region, but also because of COVID. We are very happy to continue on this journey and enable some of this access issue that can be addressed even further. So I think a lot more, we are going to see the deep tech really transform different sector to address quite a number of access issue. I think later part we will have a lot more macro discussion, but I think that's where my passion is and how the whole team across different countries envision ourselves to play the role.
Thank you so much, Cortilia. The use of deep technology to enable access. For our participants, I think it's a good thought to start off in this journey this afternoon. let me move on to Souliyo. Souliyo, please do share with us how deep tech is deployed within your business, and more importantly, how has it helped in you enhancing your services to the customers in Laos? Souliyo, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Actually, we just started to integrate deep tech into our services to improve our customer experience. Most of the use case that we have so far. Couple of the example that we use. For example, now we have many million data point where how much time people spend at the shopping mall, supermarket, or a particular restaurant or the nightclub. What we do is like we integrated the deep tech to make sure that if you are as a customer, you are entering the supermarket, right? So then we know that in this particular time, people would spend amount of time shopping or doing grocery shopping. We would recommend our driver to go there at the particular time. So then the customer really reduce the waiting time of the customer to get the taxi services in everywhere 24 hours. Another case of example that we have is like at night, especially that we see people cannot wait. The cancellation time at night for us before integrated the deep tech is about like 20%, because people go out at night drinking, choice change really quickly. You request a taxi, you cannot wait 5 minutes, then you just like, I just walk there, just cancel. After we integrated the deep tech, the waiting time reduced it to 3 minutes, and then the cancellation time reduced from 20% to only like 4 to 5% on the busiest night, like Friday night and Saturday night. That's how we improve the experience of the customer when they use. But for the customer side, it seemed like something never happened accidentally, but in fact is the deep tech that helped them. Another case that we use is for our driver as well. So because people are working at night, they want to know what is the expect volume or booking they might get, right? If the busiest nights, they would stay longer to make more income, and we can predict the area where, like if we know that this restaurant, we have customer went there, like 500 people went there by our services. So we can recommend our driver, like we know that area they close at like.
Souliyo, I think your mic may have been muted by accident. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Like we recommend our driver to go to the area that might serve our customer, go back to like before, right? They would be able to, we would be able to predict for them, like, okay, just go to this restaurant or this area, you will get more customer because we see more of our customer go there, something like that. We do this entirely with the deep tech. We don't use any manual process at all. That's improve our customer experience and also improve our revenues as well.
Thank you very much, Souliyo. So, we are hearing another element of how the use of deep tech AI has helped, not just on the end user part, but more importantly, I think the business partners are also reaping the benefits as well. So thank you very much for your sharing. And I'll move on to our next speaker, Xelia. From just an individual entrepreneur, Xelia, you are working in an accelerator. You have engaged many startups and entrepreneurs, in your line of work, and I'm very sure many of whom would have deployed some form of deep technology. Perhaps you could share your thoughts. How has it transformed the various industrial sectors in Malaysia?
Thanks, TJ. So I would like to say, I want to say thank you once again for having me. I think we have a very esteemed panelist this afternoon. And from my side, I would probably more on a macro level, because we don't exactly own a tech company itself. I've actually, in my entire career experience, been working with a lot of entrepreneurs, specifically in the technology side of things. So over the last 1 year or so, and because of the pandemic, we actually see a lot more adoption of technology across a lot of the industries and economies in Malaysia. Specifically, I think if we look at manufacturing itself, people are now more willing to talk to some of my entrepreneurs in a sense that, like, they look at logistics, they look at warehousing, because everybody is stuck at home, and also about remote workforce. I don't know if my team are actually working from home or are they not working from home. And this is the time where it was a lot easier for my entrepreneurs to sort of knock on the doors of this business people, and then say, can I do like a Zoom presentation of my technology to you? I think prior to this, many of them are very skeptical, and many of them are not willing to sort of like look into adopting new technology, because they will say things like, why fix something when it's nothing wrong with it at that moment in time, right? So I think over time, we have seen a lot of movements in terms of the payment side of things as well, in terms of even down to the aunties and uncles who owns little pop-up shops along the roadside and all. They are also adopting technology, specifically on the payment side, as well as getting themselves onboarded into some of the super apps like the likes of Grab, so that they can continue to actually sell to their customers who are now unable to sort of go out and actually purchase, say, goods and services from these people, right? So we see adoption of like payments even down to that level of business users. Other than that, what else we see is also in terms of agriculture. I think some of the key players in Malaysia are now really looking at how can we grow in terms of agri-tech by using technology, right? So two of my alumni startups, one of them have actually introduced like a new model called co-farming. And basically what it intends to do is to actually help the smallholder farmers who may not have the sort of resources or the scientific knowledge or technology knowledge or access to be able to now adopt technology and then move into commercial farming at a very much reduced risk, because you go on a co-farming model side. We have also seen in terms of a lot of proof of concepts or pilot projects that's actually now being carried out by a lot of plantation companies to adopt IoT as well as also drone technology. Like for those who don't know, I think there is a company in Malaysia called Aerodyne. They are actually ranked second in the world by the German Drone Industry Insights in terms of providing enterprise solutions for a lot of different industries, all the way from construction to even agriculture right now. So in terms of like adoption of technology, I think it's across the board. Most of the industries are actually doing it right now, and we actually see a higher adoption level and higher acceptability of technology to be considered by the businesses.
Thank you very much, Xelia. You shared something that really echoed with me, in that this has been an era where we've seen a paradigm shift and a mindset change amongst the traditional industrial sectors. That there's now a greater adoption and willingness to look into technology, to embrace even the startups and entrepreneurs to be part of their ecosystem. So thanks very much for sharing that. Thanks very much for sharing that.
Most welcome.
Yeah. Let me move on to then Amy. We've heard about how digital technologies has shaped and transformed and changed different sectors, as well as introduced opportunities. We also know, however, that the access to good quality data is also very important. Souliyo was talking about the collection of data points. Cortilia was talking about how tech has enabled access. So with this thought, the access to good quality data, and looking at the ASEAN context, perhaps you could share what are the main issues that you have observed, with say data collection in Brunei, and then perhaps across the region. Yeah, Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, TJ. So I think there are a lot of consistent issues when it comes to representation and data across the entire region. But specifically, we start in Brunei, and I think COVID has really exacerbated some of the prevailing issues that's been around for a while. So for example, because of COVID, the digital transformation that would have taken 5 years has taken about a year. I know that's definitely something that's happened here in Brunei, and I think some elements of that has really been similar and across all the other countries in Southeast Asia, but also globally. And so when we have a situation where a country is rapidly adopting digital technology, there's also, I guess, because of COVID, a demand for digitalizing things like healthcare. And we have, I'm sure a lot of other countries in Southeast Asia has as well, an app that you use to scan when you enter locations just to be able to aid with contact tracing. And so a lot of, I think AI has been used to help really manage and analyze that data that's been collected through this application. And I think this is similar across other countries as well, where we would see issues, I suppose, when it comes time to developing policies based on that data, is when we realize that that data sample is not representing the entire population in terms of the demographics and socioeconomic strata that we have within the country. And we're a small country, so it's quite manageable. And when you look at AI as a whole, it's really as good as the data that you use. And when you have base, I suppose, national policies around healthcare, around COVID, vaccine access, for example, that's based around the data that's collected through a mobile application that depends on smartphone usage, that depends on your accessibility to the device, but also your ability to use it comfortably. So if you look at the demographics that don't, I guess, abide by that, for those who are underprivileged in remote communities where internet access is not easily available, but also older generations where they either don't want to or don't have the ability to use smartphones. And then you suddenly realize that the policies that are based around the I guess, analysis that this AI is using is really not representative of the people it's trying to serve. And then you have policies that are designed around a very skewed demographic. And in Brunei, it's not as big of an issue simply because we're very small. Our mobile penetration rate is, I think, over 100%. And for anyone who's not really included in the initial data set can easily be reached out to and included. And we have other ways of really making sure that our data is a lot more comprehensive. But when you look at other countries around the region and other services, whether it is commercial or government, then you suddenly realize that the actual implications of this lack of representation can be really astronomical. So I'll give you one example. When you have undocumented migrants or refugees that make up a significant portion of your community, and yet you are using the data set that doesn't include them as part of services that are being rolled out or policies that are being developed, then you are suddenly I guess, exacerbating the differences in access, but oftentimes it can also lead to really dangerous policies. And so when we're talking about the implementation of AI, whether it is in a commercial setting or across government services, it is really important for us to be aware of the limitations of the data that we're using, as well as the implications of not really representing not just those that weren't included, but those included in an accurate way. And so I'll give you another example. When we're looking at gender representation, this is something that's always been an issue, regardless of whether or not it is using deep tech or just even traditional design when you're looking at car seats. So I would hazard a guess that most of the women in this call would have never felt comfortable in a standard car seat because it was never designed for us, never designed for our bodies, never designed with us in mind. And so when you're developing algorithms that are or really teaching your AI to be able to learn from the data that you're collecting, you really have to understand how that's really going to affect the output and the implications of that. And I'm sure we'll touch on security later, but really here, just on inclusive design, it's a really big factor when it comes to data collection. And then we also have issues around accessibility. So remote communities, impoverished communities who are not included in ride-hailing services, for example. So if you're on an island somewhere where LOCA is not available, then you're not going to be included in that data set. And so I think it's an active, I guess, process that we have to participate in, and also to be mindful that for those who are starting out with available data sets online, a lot of these are actually not from this region. A lot of this is actually not representative of the people in our communities and experiences that we have, and are designed or at least developed or collected really from other parts of the world like US, Europe. And so this is something that you have to be extremely mindful of when you're developing your services and when you're thinking about implementing policies based on these the data analysis that comes out of it. So that's really for me, but I'm sure we'll touch more on security later.
Thank you very much, Amy. As we move to that macro, it's not just about data collection. It's not just about how much data you have, but the relevancy of the data and the inclusivity of the data. So it's a very good point that Amy shared with us. Before I go into talking to Kohei-san, I would want to encourage our participants. Please feel free to drop your questions into the chat box. And you would probably have already seen that we have put up several articles and reports that ERIA has done over the course of this period that addresses quite a number of the issues that have been raised. So do go on to those links. And of course, you have the names of our speakers. Please feel free to look them up on LinkedIn, get connected with them, so that you can find out more about what they are doing. And to, as an entrepreneur myself, it's always about collaboration. Find out more about what they're doing and look at how can we collaborate with each other. So Kohei-san, Amy has brought up a lot of interesting points on data integrity, the accessibility. Let's talk a little bit about privacy of data. You are the expert in this field. What are the main trends that you have been observing in different regions in the world, and also how do you see this data privacy debate evolving in Asia? Kohei-san.
Yeah, thank you, TJ, and great appreciated to organize this great conference. So the Amy is made a great presentation about the accessibilities. So my part is about the privacy. Of course, the privacy is the fundamental rights for all of us. Since the 1980s, the OECD has been started the basic principle, the 8th principle, the baselines of the data protection, such as the GDPR, is that started from the almost 3 years ago. It was a very strict regulation in Europe. Besides the last year has been started in California in the United States. It's a CCPA. The consumer privacy rights underlining for the California residents. Besides in Asian market, the Japan will be started the new amendment from the next April, as well as the China has been making a new commitment for the privacy regulations, and the South Korea is try to take adequacies, which means the data transferring in between the Europe and South Korea, which is the strict relationship in between the bilateral countries. And the Asian market is in just the beginning to transform in a digital utilities, in accordance with those parts of the very significances to consider to use the data besides to protect the data, especially the human rights. The privacy is a very important point. The good example is just like Grab is the one of famous the ride sharing app in Asian market. They are losing customer data many times, and the Singapore the government is the imposing very big issues for them. So why does it happen? That we are trying to use the digital services for our daily operations. So besides, through the COVID, we accelerated the societies to become a digital. So this is a very key part of the elements to protect the privacy. Besides we have the granularities of the data utilization in terms of privacies. For example, the European people and American people has a different perspective of the privacy. Of course, we have a very different concept of the privacy in each Asian countries. Even I'm living in Japan, and in China, the South Korea, or other South Asian countries has a different perspective. So this is a very difficult because we are living on the internet. The internet is a borderless so far, but the problem is we have a different kind of concept of the data protections. I believe this is the ultimate of the consumer relations, and then each person has a different perspective of privacy, especially that I'm a male, but the female has a different privacy concepts, or other disabled people is feeling the difference. So this is a very complex piece. How we can overcome is try to customize all the privacy concept. We have started to work on the privacy policy making. This is a touch point with the customers. When you are when you are consent the specific services, you have to approve this privacy agreement with the services is a very key part of it. However, still we haven't perfect privacy policy for all of this. So this is a very important. All the people is not aware what will be used to your data for the services. That sometimes it's been happens, the discriminations, something happens, just like the bad affections. And this is a very significance at this time. So the privacy perspective. So we have to reconsider what kind of the privacy experience is the best for your customers and services, especially you use your data for the public services. The public institution has to commit to make more explainable actions for them. So this is the uncontroversial at this time. It's not just to say about the privacy, we have to commit more privacy-friendly approach for all the services.
Thank you very much, Kohei-san. Interesting to hear from you, really from the perspective that, country by country, the whole concept, the perspective of privacy differs, and therefore it creates that challenge in policy making. And I think really for technology at the speed that is advancing, it does seem sometimes that policy making is catching up to technology advancements, and that creates challenges. Since we are still on privacy, maybe let me continue, with you again, Kohei-san, before I go on to Amy to talk a little bit on the whole discrimination and accessibility. Kohei-san, when we talk about privacy and say entrepreneurs, because you have worked with the private sector, how and what would you recommend to our entrepreneurs, in terms of how can they better manage and embed privacy into their business models? And also, what are the key factors that they need to take into account?
Yeah, that's very challenging for entrepreneurs as well as me. What I can recommend is just to focusing on the imaginations from the users. This is a very important. Among the privacy industry, we often quoted the impact for the users. When we choose to select some data sets to be collected through your consent management, this sometimes your action is been a direct influences to the users. From the privacy perspective, you share your data to any third parties. Those party is untrusted. They will use the customer data unintentional consequences. That is not the fair for the users. So I strongly recommend it to all the services that try to seek the fairness in between the users and services and companies, that it brings a trusted. That I guess this is very important. And also we are working on the privacy by design. This is coming from the Anne Kabukian. She is the former privacy commissioner in Canada. She quoted this concept in 2009, which was been an ERIA adopter of the privacy default, is the privacy first, the services. So this is the primary things for all the companies to develop the ideas. The good case is just like the Salesforce is working on this part, then they are gathering the team internally, 2 or 3 or team members associated. They are trying to work from scratch to be a privacy concept into design. So this is a very important. They also they try to convince the team other members, such as the business side, is try to take more literacies to seek the impact in advance. So this is a very important to work for the team, not just product management. It's just for the strategy for all the companies, even the startups that's working on this part is very important.
Thank you very much, Kohei-san. So something for entrepreneurs to think about privacy by design, starting really from the baseline and working it upwards as opposed to the other way around. Thank you. Really food for thought for us. Amy, let me come back to you. You know, even as we talk about privacy and as we looked at what you were sharing earlier in terms of data management, data availability. I guess one of the issues that we also face is like what we shared briefly, data biasness and discrimination. In your view, how do you think this is affecting ASEAN? And what are the implications for policy making?
So I think that bias in, I guess, our data, especially when it's relating to AI and machine learning, is extremely prevalent now. I don't know if you all have Netflix, and a documentary came out just as I was about to talk about it the other day. And when you have data that's not representative, then by default, you are designing, or your AI technology will inadvertently be designed to serve or at least address only the issues or the needs of a very specific subset of society. And in that sense, then you have, you can extrapolate that to the development of government policies where, simple as vaccinations, for example, vaccination distribution. If you're basing it around hotspots where most people are using these mobile apps, then obviously there are remote communities that might not be as equally represented. You might not collect feedback data in terms of their reactions to vaccinations, and then that can have a whole host of implications. But I think what's even more concerning, especially in the region, is really when you have data that feeds into biases about underrepresented communities or discriminated against communities, for example, refugees, undocumented immigrants who are now around the region, predominantly from Myanmar in terms of the Rohingya. And when you are developing, I guess, national policy based on algorithms that use data that selectively chooses information. So for example, you're not proactively looking to include data sets from undocumented migrants or refugees, then the redistribution of resources will almost certainly be damaging to those communities, because then resources that could have gone to helping them will be distributed elsewhere. Some of these policy decisions when it comes to the use of data or exclusion of certain data can be inadvertent, but in a lot of cases it's actually intentional. And so this is something that a lot of governments in the region need to, or at least civil society organizations need to really proactively look at, especially when it comes to dealing with refugees and migrants. But this is also really important when it comes to things like dealing with the climate crisis. So if you are excluding, for example, emissions from imports as part of your data collection and also analysis of projections, for example, when it comes to climate mitigation, then you are not really getting an accurate representation of the policies that need to be put in place to mitigate that problem. So when it comes to non-renewable energy sources, we have a lot of countries, mine included, that are extremely dependent on the oil and gas sector, and perhaps not including the data from that sector as accurately as is required might mean that the policies that they put forward, or at least the targets they're putting forward, might not be representative of what they can technically achieve, but also what is absolutely necessary for us to be able to make significant change. And so when it comes to the type of data that's being used, we have to really concern ourselves with the intentional, selection of or selectivity of the data that they're including, especially at government level. But also when it comes to commercial uses of data in, startups, companies that are utilizing AI, the biases that come from the data sets they're depending on, for example, census data that don't include everybody, or other forms of data collection, for example, from telcos that they're using as, so I think a lot of startup ecosystems try to make these data sets freely available and collected through telcos. They might not be representative of remote communities that are not inclusive. And so when a lot of innovation is being developed that's meant to be supporting the economy and all these communities, then obviously it's not going to serve those people who are not included. And that can be extremely damaging to, for example, and we can again look at gender as a specific example, where you have urban design that doesn't include the risks that a lot of women face on a day-to-day basis. And I'll give you a simple example. When people design where public restrooms are for women, it doesn't really take into consideration some of the issues that women face. And I don't know if you've been to Europe, where a lot of the older public restrooms are underground somewhere in a really secluded area, and you think, well, who on earth designed that? So a lot of the biases that come with selectivity of data is really, it can really implicate generations. It can implicate the quality of life and the security of people across the region for a long time. And I think because of how distributed a lot of our communities are, we're not as concentrated. So for example, there are a lot of remote communities and villages in every ASEAN country. That's extremely important for us to really be mindful of as well. So I think that's really my points when it comes to biases.
Thanks very much, Amy. In hearing the different sharing, on the one hand, we see deep tech and its positive influences. We have also heard from our speakers in terms of potential issues and challenges. I see then that there is a greater need really for engagement across all sectors, engagement across different fronts, different demographics, different sectors, so that together we can build I think a more cohesive type of a environment ecosystem, and then through that to be able to see that the data and deep tech really fulfills what what I would think it was originally intended for. And I guess as we look at partnerships and engagement, I want to move back to Xelia, because at ScaleUp as an accelerator, a lot of what you do is really about partnerships. It's about the engagement. From your experience, Xelia, could you share with us then how has deep tech really just been influencing business trends and looking at economic transformation within Malaysia? And how do you see the whole public-private partnership being critical to facilitating this?
Thanks, DJ. So also hearing from Aimee in terms of inclusivity, right? So if we look at Malaysia right now, I think if we see the acceleration of adoption of technology over the last 1 year during the COVID, the government has actually been very supportive in the sense of actually trying to help as many tech entrepreneurs in Malaysia. At the same time, also have to balance in terms of the economic returns. So they also have to look at in terms of how the SME is going to grow. We introduced a National Technology and Innovation Sandbox sometime in the third quarter of 2020, during sort of like the height of the pandemic and all. And recently, we have also introduced what we call the My Digital Blueprint. The reason why these initiatives have actually been put in place, as we all understand, I think for deep technology, it's not something that is entirely cheap to start off, and also to sort of see the fruits of that sort of R&Ds and stuff like that. So with deep tech, in many parts of the world, deep techs usually will have to be supported in a way, at least from the funding perspective, is usually undertaken by the government. So in this case, when they introduced the sandbox in August of 2020, that includes funding in there. And the sandbox currently has actually been created whereby they have actually gotten participations of quite a number of corporates, because at the end of the day, it is sort of pointless when you have a lot of startups or innovation that's coming out from even the universities and all. But if there is no market access, if there is no market need for the adoption of such technology, or even discovery of such technology by our companies and corporates, it's pointless, right? So the sandbox is actually meant to create basically a safe space to connect some of the innovation that's coming out, not just by the commercial startups themselves, but as well as from the academic side of things, to some of the corporates. And mostly right now at the very start, what's happening in the sandbox is many of the corporates that are actually participating, they are in a way sort of the GLCs, right? And like Aimee said earlier, if you just have, like, say, part of the corporate ecosystem that's participating in this sandbox, it may not actually show you the full picture in terms of adoption of deep technology or even technology itself within the corporate space. So one of the challenge I feel that we will then face here in Malaysia is basically being able to rope in the smaller companies or the private companies to basically come into the sandbox, open up their ecosystem to basically pilot or do proof of concepts for some of the innovations that's actually coming out in the Malaysian startup ecosystem. So hence the public-private partnership is something that I think is very, very essential, right? So for ScaleUp Malaysia itself, we really believe this is a model that will work. And we have actually sort of, in about 2 months ago, we have actually signed up a partnership with the Global Innovation and Creative Agency of Malaysia to basically look at how we can actually bring in the startups themselves to be now accessible to the sandbox, and also connect to corporates, which are not just the GLCs, but we expand our network to like the likes of all the private corporates themselves to look at discovery of innovation, which it's not usually easily accessible to them. So one way that's with ScaleUp. I'm also on the council of the Malaysian Business Angels Network. And one of the things that we are currently facilitating is actually on corporate innovation, to basically see how can we actually, because a lot of corporates, they know that they need to adopt deep technology to sort of move forward and continue to be relevant in the market. The only problem with them is that, of course, one is actually on costs in terms of funding. that sort of like, there are certain programs that the government has put in place to provide certain subsidies for adoption of technology. But the most important thing is actually the readiness of corporate to actually work with technology companies. The bigger ones could potentially say that when I meet up with startups, I'm actually looking at an acquisition. But if for those of you in the room who are startups, the reason why you started is because you don't want to work for someone. If it's actually being acquired by a big corporate, then you got to start working for someone. It's no longer your own business, right? So we got to sort of be able to educate the corporates, like what is the best method to actually work with the startups and the technology companies themselves. Don't tell them that you want to take 51% shares of their company. They will no longer be interested to sort of continue innovating, right? We basically guide them in terms of like, what are the technology trends that's actually happening in the market that is relevant to their industry. So this sort of a model, the public-private partnership thing, is actually very, very important for us to look at. And in order for things like the sandbox, as well as the My Digital Blueprint that we have actually just come up with in the last 2 months to actually really work and to basically accelerate the growth of use of technology within the ecosystem, we need to actually adopt that model. I hope that was clear.
Yeah, very clear. Thank you very much, Xelia. Readiness to engage. I think very important. Something
Correct.
for all of us to think about. Souliyo, from Malaysia, I want to shift to Laos. Because as the Vice President in the Lao ICT Commerce Association, how do you see deep tech then influencing the local businesses in Laos? And from your perspective, what more do you think is needed to help them grow as we look into the future economy?
Yes, I see the data will be really potentially help a lot of local business, especially in Laos. In between our organization or our association, we also encourage people to keep all the data possible on every business. For us, is the data will be only something that will help to reduce the cost, even during marketing, improving the service, because when you have the data, the decision is easier and you understand your customer better. And when you improve your products based on your customer, then you are more likely to retain the customer that need. But one thing that I like to share the situation about Laos is that most of the business still struggling on keeping their data, and we see the data as the oil, but we just don't have refinery manufacturing, to reuse that data. For us, is each small business get access to a useful data, either from the private sector or public sector, they will be able to do their business more efficiently and reduce their costs. For example, that what LOCA is trying to do at the moment is that we try to get people to go eat at the restaurants and to experience the food. But now we just have the second lockdown, so this program is being paused a little bit, so that we know that, okay, our customer likely to go to this type of restaurant. So then we can use the same data to get the same customer to go to more restaurants that don't have access to the same customer. So that's how can we distribute the revenues, not the revenue, but the income to all the businesses that never have access to the same kind of customer. For example, if you have the restaurant inside the city, the rent is really, really expensive. But if you have the restaurant is a little bit outside of the center area, you might not have access to this same customer. So what we did is we try to get the customer, our existing customer that go to the city center, to go beyond that, to expand their footprint to more businesses that are not located in the center area. So that's how we can distribute the income to more restaurants outside of the city as well. And we also plan to include many more sectors, not just the food, but right now we are testing with the food service, because that is the first thing that we can starting with. Also the other area as well, the deep tech and the data is really important, because right now we hit in the second wave, and the only data we have is just the number waiting for the government to publish every day, but people don't have access to real-time tracings and other kind of like other countries that have. That's how I see the potential the data would be benefit for Laos.
Thank you very much. I think when you talk about deep tech and also the potential it has for especially the developing countries, definitely that whole potential is there. Of course, with the necessary safeguards and privacy and the whole management and engagement of data, as what our other speakers were sharing, becomes important as well. Thanks very much for sharing this. Before I move on to Cortilia, just one more call for our participants. Please do use the chat box. Any questions that you have for our speakers, they are here. And tap on their thoughts, tap on their experiences to find out a bit more, especially if you are an entrepreneur and you are interested in this field, or you have been journeying in this field for a while now. Yeah. So Cortilia, to round off our this session, as we look beyond the pandemic, as we look into the future economy, as in Singapore we like to call it, how do you see deep tech changing the landscape of your particular sector, and perhaps even the other sectors that you are familiar with?
Sure, that's a very big question. Maybe just an observation first about deep tech. I think Xelia already shared quite a fair bit about like when the technology was leading ahead of the need, how the government come in and support. The first time I was maybe encounter with AI, that was back in 2006, 2007, when I was still in Seattle, United States. And what I have observed is past decade, when we talk about AI, a lot of effort have been put in to really build up the algorithm to understand the nature of the data. Particularly, I'm in healthcare, so from diagnosis, treatment, all the way into the elderly care. There's been a lot of conversation about how do we train the model algorithm with the accuracy that we truly can make it useful. 10 years later, interestingly, some of the topics that I have come across 15 years ago still exist, like compliance issue with the pharmaceutical medicine intake. How do we make sure we understand certain disease reading, even say Google or the tech giants kind of jump on the game to read the MRI, CT image for diagnosis and treatment. It makes you wonder what happened in the past decade. So the observation from me has been a lot of effort in the past 10 years or 15 years are to really create what we call medtech, make the technology work, more the innovation, make something right. But then now 10, 15 years later, what we are now encountering is how does a user embrace AI? How would the AI truly generate value in our own daily decision and life? So I will give an example. I think you can, some of the participants may find interesting, you can check it out. Google created a very interesting piece of software that claimed to have about 95% accuracy to detect any diabetic's eye. So when you have diabetes, it's very likely you have certain eye issue develop later. So they read the images taken by the nurses in the local clinic. They can actually accurately predict whether you may develop the eye condition. Subsequently, you can be the specialist for a further treatment. It was deployed in Thailand last year, but it humbled down with some of the failure. And this is the key point that I'm coming to is the true issue is no longer technology, it's how the clinical workflow, how the user embark on this particular technology and integrate it in your daily decision. So what we are going to see in the future is more and more deep tech company, no matter startup, mid-sized company, even giant tech company like Google, Facebook, they will encounter this. How would the user truly understand this piece of technology innovation work in their value chain of the sector, and being able to embrace it, in being able to really integrate it in their daily business? That's going to be the key trend that we are going to see, no matter now or even in the new normal. Pandemic has accelerated the technology adoption. So we're also seeing a lot more big tech companies realize that they really need to understand how the user will intake the technology, will uptake the technology, will adopt the technology, truly how it will work in their life. But tricky enough, it will also mean some part of the value chain in each and every sector is going to be disrupted. The disruption may not mean the bad thing. I will give you another interesting example. Is in the HR business, a lot of companies that I come across, they have tried to use data to manage how they calculate KPI achievement for their employee, meaning you achieve the KPI, you get a bonus, right? In the past, you always hire a team of data analysts just to try to compile the sales number, market share number, price, and all. If you have 185 countries in your portfolio, then you spend months to calculate. Now, a lot of these can be managed by data. So what I start seeing is more and more HR hours are freed up to handle mental health issue, to handle motivation issue, to handle how can I make my employee more productive, but not necessarily from just whipping them and get more sales target achieved. It's more about how can we work with the aspect of the overall wellness of the employee, subsequently leading up to the productivity change. So I can see some of this value chain, after it gets disrupted, it will become interesting for certain main hour or certain dedication, more towards some of the soft element that AI or technology may not be there to address. But today, if those time is being freed up by the deep tech adoption, then we start seeing more and more of that can happen. I think more and more we are going to see in the new normal that some of these deep tech finally get into the right place for their use cases, their application, and hopefully with all of this technology help to transform our attention in our professional life onto something that we find even more worth to really talk about and increase the well-being of the population. I think that's why when Amy talk about inclusion, discrimination, bias is very much to my heart, because working in healthcare space, this is something we're confronted every day, but we also see quite a number of a good conversation generated just by realize the natural bias of the data set and how we humans need to place ourselves on top of AI to address some of the professional life or private life, some of the conversation and topic we truly need to dedicate our time to. So that's sort of my observation.
Thank you very much, Cortilia. Very good observations, and I do agree fully with you. I want to thank all our speakers for sharing your thoughts. For the remaining period that we have, we want to just really get and collate all the questions that have come in from our participants. For Q&A, I will hand the floor over to Lena, who will facilitate this time. Lena, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, TJ, and thank you to all of the speakers. A very interesting discussions indeed to nurturing technology adoptions for entrepreneurs nowadays. So as we see, we agree that data is crucial, and we've seen so many questions in the chat box asking to open each of data in each of countries, but I'm afraid since we only have limited time, maybe it would be best to discuss further, and I'm sure all of the speakers here will be delighted to connect with you all through LinkedIn, probably to have it more connections. So first question that appear on the chat box is about the sandboxes and regulations. So perhaps this would be best to be answered to our two entrepreneurs in Singapore and Laos PDR. We would like to know if there was any regulations in each of your countries that helped you to start your business, referring to the sandboxes. Maybe I would like to address the first questions to the gentleman first. Souliyo, would be okay for you?
I think the sandbox is something we always encourage our government to do it, but officially we don't have any sandbox in Laos. But however, I think Lao government is really open to hear the idea. For us as well, we did the local ride hailing service, and we do have our e-wallet. The government allow us to operate in the smaller scale, and is negotiable. That's for Lao. But I think it's important for startup to test their idea, and for new businesses to be created. We really need the sandbox. That's our association point of view is also the same. We encourage that all governments should have the sandbox.
Okay, yes. Hopefully there will be soon established in Laos PDR. So moving forward to the Singapore, we would like to hear from Singapore perspective. Cortilia, maybe the floor is yours.
Sure. I think in my sector, because we're in healthcare, so uniquely, whenever we do the testing that we call, we generally will probably move towards more the medical institution. So here in Singapore, luckily that we have very strong public hospital, restructured hospital in this case. And so we are very proactive in terms of speaking with all the public hospital, how we can implement some of the testing bed project together with the hospital. That's generally how we are being supported by the local ecosystem. And luckily also, I think another really key benefit I think TJ mentioned at the beginning, we actually have team present in Singapore, Taiwan, and the Netherlands, which is a bit unique because we're very new tech. We need to go more the niche market, the top percentile, the early adopter across multiple countries. So we are quite lucky in the sense that I think ecosystem is something we keep talking over and over again, just to make sure that we are not there alone as a singular individual fight. We try to build around with telco, with different type of company that truly will all come in to improve some of the infrastructure, because our goal is really to provide access to the general folks who have interest in medical education, subsequently may want to become a medical professional. So we are lucky enough that we are supported by quite a number of the ecosystem. Rather than having a government organized sandbox, we tend to be more going with some of these collaborator and then the testing bed project with the hospital.
Okay, thank you, Cortilia. So I saw that Kohei also sent the link, something on the chat box. Maybe you would like to share the sandboxes process in Japan.
Sure. We had started the sandbox frameworks so far. I had heard about it just a few years ago. However, the problem is it's just in a practice, we have a very complexities. We have a jurisdiction in each of the region, such as you want to use the drone system, you have to permit it many of the jurisdictions. It is very complicated. Even they appointed as the first barriers, you have to go beyond many things. So that's why the sandbox is a very complex piece. But the Japanese government is try to appointed some of the smart city related initiative this times. They assigned some of the appointed cities to become smart. They're using new technology into the process. However, this is also controversial, which is the requirements for the cities. So yeah, I think the sandbox is a very good ideas, but for the practice, it's very hard this times.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure it takes time to escalate it. So Xelia, this is your expertise. So how do you want to share it in Malaysia? I mean, the sandbox practices.
So in Malaysia, I think the good thing in the sense that before the National Technology and Innovation Sandbox was actually created, we had other two sandboxes. We also had the FinTech sandbox, and we also have a regulatory sandbox. I think like what Kohei mentioned, sometimes sandbox, it's the aspiration is great, but actually sometimes to manage a sandbox and also the outcome from the sandbox may not be as easy, right? So the current NTIS, which is the sandbox here that the government has put in the effort, they have actually this time around have gotten quite a lot of the big GLCs in Malaysia to participate in the sandbox. They have also taken into consideration in terms of availability of resources, specifically on the funding side of things, to ensure any projects that's coming out, whether from the local universities or the normal conventional startups themselves, that goes into the sandbox actually will immediately have certain access on the identified 5 sectors that they have actually put in to the right corporate or the GLCs to do sort of any proof of concept in a safe environment, supported with the necessary funding that they are putting in place into the sandbox. So I think learning from the previous 2 sandboxes that was actually being created, this time around, I think they have sort of put in the right pieces in there to actually really get things working. It was just in August 2020, so I do hope that we see really good results coming out from there.
Yeah, we all hope so.
Yes.
So, thank you, Celia. So maybe the last question would be addressed to Aimee. So Aimee, if you would like to share your experience for the sandboxes in Brunei, and there is actually one specific question for you because you've explained a lot of experience in data collections. There's someone asking how to actually monetize personal data in exchange for access to technology to be more inclusive in data collection. So maybe you would like to share your thoughts in a very short time?
Sure, I'll be quick. So there's only
you.
one sandbox in Brunei, and it's a fintech sandbox. So if anyone's interested in Brunei fintech, which I'm not sure if anyone is, you feel free to get in touch with me, or you can contact Darussalam Enterprise here in Brunei, and I'm sure you can Google it quite easily as well. On the note about exchanging your personal data, for, I guess, monetizing your personal data in exchange for access to technology, I think there's a whole host of ethical considerations that come into that, because really it's about how do you give consent to something that you're not sure what's going to happen to your data. So for example, it's all well and good for us to say, great, I'm happy to give up my height, weight, eye color, the scans of my eyes, so that, you know, you can find out if I do have diabetes, anything like that, that's great, and you can sign that off. However, if we don't have regulations or protocols as to what happens to that data afterwards, and really make sure that the individual has full awareness of the not just the economic implications as to what that data can really provide for companies, for example, can make more money off your data than you would ever be able to, because you wouldn't have the ability to aggregate that information and sell it for a higher price. But there's also the issue of security, the security implications that person, if you can actually make sure that that individual is fully aware of every single security implication and can give actual consent to their data being bought in exchange to their ability, the ability to include them in wider data sets that are going to be used, then I think that's doable. My concern is that it's very unlikely that that level of awareness and consent can be achieved with the lack of transparency we have right now. And so I'll leave it at that. And I'm sure there's a whole conversation that could be had with that.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would love to hear your more explanations, as well as goes to all of the speakers, but I'm afraid that's time to wrap up. So I hand over the floor again to Julia.
Thank you very much, Lina. Thank you to all. Thank you to all speakers. I think we had a fantastic conversation, especially given the time limit. I will be very brief because I think that Amy already has touched upon one of the keywords, which is awareness. I think we wanted in this conversation to touch upon the fact that even if, you know, the people in this room, we connected to this discussion because we are somehow interested in this issue, we may be somehow aware of, you know, benefits and risks of, you know, technologies and what lie ahead. but probably we are not fully aware. So we certainly need more awareness, again, on benefits, but also risks, and also better education to understand much, much better the implication of all the many issues we have discussed. I would like to thank once again the speakers also for being very interactive in the chat box. I saw that so many links were exchanged, so I hope that participants will have the time to check upon these links. And again, to all participants to connect with us again for episode number 3. We will be back in 4 weeks' time with the episode number 4, and we will share soon, okay, they're already there. We will share soon more information about the agenda and the registration link. I think it's now time to close, but once again, thank you everybody for this very, very interesting conversation. Thank you, Amy, thank you, Xelia, thank you, Kohei-san, Cortilia, and Souliyo. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much
Bye.
for your time.
Stay safe,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.